All right, welcome everyone. I believe we are live for Beyond the Chatbot, Building AI-Powered Experiences in Health Tech. As we are kicking off here, I want you to invite you all to introduce yourselves in the chat. What we found with these webinars is that really the presentation is as good as your involvement. We want you not just to get acquainted with our panelists, who I'll be introducing shortly here, but also to get to know each other. There are some really exciting folks logged on today who are building some really exciting things. Primarily, we have folks joining from different kinds of early stage health tech companies, operators and founders. We also have some folks joining more from the enterprise side, some folks joining more from the AI side, and we may even have a couple of folks joining from the clinician side. So we're really excited to get you all in conversation with each other and filling the kind of gaps in our own conversations. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I think we'll go ahead and get started here. We've got quite a few folks present, and we've got really fantastic panelists with us, so I don't want to shortchange their conversation. So first off, as we get started, I want to thank Smartlabs for sponsoring, for bringing this amazing panel together. Smartlabs does software development in the health tech space, working with folks building digital health products. So you'll learn a little bit more about us in that follow-up email as well. And one of our panelists is from Smartlabs. Um, Today we are here. We know AI is hot. We've had a little bit of time to feel that burn, to think about how we apply that in our day to day. But when it comes to implementation in health tech, there's a lot of different threads coming together to actually make AI a useful tool in the healthcare setting. So we've seen, at this point, we've all seen very excellently designed AI solutions, and we've seen some AI solutions that have not lived up to the hype. So this panel is really going to focus on the real world decisions, the trade-offs we make, and the lessons that we learn building AI systems in healthcare, thinking especially about the sensitivity and the centrality and the high trust nature of healthcare environment and how distinctive that is. To get us started, I do want to share a little poll here to get a sense of where you all are coming from. So you should be seeing that now. It's just a two-question poll, just to get a sense of what your role is and what your biggest obstacle is in AI application. This will help our panel really focus in on interest areas. We know there are some of you who are still thinking about where do we use AI, what's the best use case. Others who are really focused on implementing with a safety first approach and with high impact. And then others thinking about deploying in real world workflows. So I want to get a better sense of where you all are at. I will give just about 15 more seconds. I see a lot of answers still coming through on this poll. So I'll give you just a few more seconds to vote. And almost there. I see a few more responses still coming in. All right, so we've got about a two-thirds who have responded to this poll. So I'm going to go ahead and uh, switch that poll off and share the results. I believe you all can see these now. We have almost half of you are founders, another third are operators, and then the last 20% are AI curious. Welcome to all of you. And it looks like 60% are really in that final stage of how do we deploy AI in real world workflows. So really excited to get into that. And we'll also touch a little bit on this middle stage of implementation and this getting started, but we'll try as much as possible to focus in on these real examples. So, oh, turning off that poll and turning to our panel. I'm not going to give them too much introduction because I want to give them plenty of time to share their expertise. But just going briefly to kind of locate the experience that you all are bringing and how you're approaching this conversation today. I'm going in the order that I see on my screen. Tanya Zucconi is an AI advisor and healthcare operator. Marco Soto is an engineering manager at Smartlabs. Taylor Rose is founder of Kinstead. And Sunaina Kavi is a product leader, head of product at Omada Health. So really excited to have these range of perspectives coming into this conversation and to get into a really application focused conversation. So, to kick us off with the $1 million or $1 billion question, when you're building AI in digital health, how do you decide what to automate and what to keep human? I'm going to start with Tanya, if you want to kick us off on this question. How do you think through that question?
Certainly. Thank you, Hillary, and Smartlabs and all the panelists. I think this is going to be a great conversation today. So, I think anytime you are solving for a problem and you expect that AI is going to be a part of that solution, first of all, you should always have a human in the loop, because the humans have to identify the data, train the data, monitor the data. Even when you're talking about agents, despite there being chat rooms now where agents can talk only to each other and humans are only allowed to observe and not participate, I still think, and in particular in healthcare, that we have to have the human in the loop. I think it comes down to having a clinician-informed team, uh, clinician participating team that really looks at what the question is, what you're trying to solve, and then look at the risk. Because the higher up on the maturity curve you go, the greater the risk, and that's going to help inform how you address that particular situation. So I'll keep my response brief so that the others can also jump in, and I'm happy to riff off their answers.
That can happen. Kinstead is a AI native platform where we help nurse practitioners start and grow their own private practices. And our general rule of thumb for what we choose to use AI for versus where we choose to rely more on humans is to automate the friction, but not the judgment. So that means that we're starting with a lot of our back office services. So things I think that are now very common in the AI zeitgeist, your RCM, your credentialing, all these things that were essentially humans doing the same rote task over and over again. I think those are really right places for AI to step in and allow humans to do more creative work or more interesting work. Places where we're not trying to use AI just yet are really around clinical judgment and around interactions with patients. We have found in talking to patients and providers that a lot of the reasons that people choose to go to an independent clinician is because of that more human aspect. They really want to be able to talk to their provider. They don't want to be asked 22 questions by an AI generated flow and then get a random prescription mailed to them. So I think for us, it's been really important to use AI to make it easier for clinicians to do the things that only clinicians can do.
I love that. Because so for us at Omada, what we're really looking at is like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Because a lot of times I feel like with AI, we're kind of like what you mentioned, right? Putting like an onboarding flow together and then using AI at the end of that. But what is the real problem we're trying to solve? So if it's eligibility, right, can we sort of connect into different pieces that already exist and really get that information on behalf of the customer? Or if it's around actual care, kind of as Taylor was mentioning, where's the part where we really need empathy, right? Or is it that different types of people want different types of experiences? So I've been chatting a lot with my physician friends in the longevity space, and they've kind of mentioned that different segments of people like different approaches. And so sometimes it's by segment, sometimes it's by risk level. But I think it's oftentimes starting with the problem we're trying to solve and then saying, okay, what part of it can we use AI? Where is AI going to be really robust? Is it really dynamic? And then where can the human really augment that in such a way that the person is getting the best care and they feel really great afterwards? So that's kind of how we've been framing it at Omada.
All right, I love those perspectives. Thanks, Taylor, for sharing that guiding principle, automate the friction not the judgment. I love that as a vision. I want to pull in Marcos a little bit. You have built in a variety of industries and are now working in health tech. So would love for you to kick us off thinking about the question, what's different about building in digital health and how are the AI solutions applied differently or implemented differently or have different considerations?
Yeah, and thank you, Hillary. Well, in my opinion, I mean, developing AI in digital health is driven by clinical accuracy and data privacy. I mean, it's not just about application, it's about regulated medical tool. It must be clearly demonstrated that the AI will not hallucinate, diagnose, and will operate within the regulations and boundaries. In contrast, other industry, for example, oil and gas, while the data sensitive is important, they put the focus on the integrity of facilities and zero latency. So they create application without error. For example, an error in a high pressure valve control could be impacting a potential explosion and in some environmental disaster. But an AI consultant, the healthcare focus is on the validation and patient safety. And as mentioned in the question before, you cannot make decisions or diagnosis without a human in the loop at the same time having some guardrails. So for that, there are different consideration, but at the same time, they are different focus. I think that is a lot of room for talk in these areas. Well, that is my main consideration in the different industry. Also, the financial industry has its own particularities, but the the center focus on the patient, I think, is the key part of the health tech, which has his own regulations in that direction.
Analysts,
Think I'm
anyone
going to
else?
jump back in, Hillary, if
Yeah.
I can, and just tag off of what Marcos was saying. I think the other panelists have identified really important areas, and one criteria that I think we haven't specifically called out, but I know we all think about, is the element of trust. And so it relates to patient safety, it relates to the boundaries, it relates to these issues about privacy and about what the problem is that we're talking about. And how you determine which problem to solve requires that you consider where is the trust at most risk and how is that most easily or appropriately addressed. And that can help influence that. And I just wanted to specifically put it out there because I know we all think about it. And in particular in healthcare, I think it's critical.
Yeah, and actually, that is where our next question is going. Because trust is so critical in healthcare, people don't take medical advice that they don't trust. We know that one of the biggest challenges in AI has been building that hurdle of trust. And so, want to pose to the panel, how do you build for trust, and what are the things that we can do working with innovative technology to earn the trust of users, both on the clinical side and on the patient side? Sunaina, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this, so do you want to take a first stab at it?
Yes, I would love to, especially on that clinical side. So we have clinicians kind of embedded in our different product teams. And when we started to build last year, basically some AI features, we essentially iterated with them continuously, right? So like as the model kind of generated outputs, we would understand, does this work? Does it not work? You know, is it safe? Is it valid? Is it usable for the member? And then making sure that they trusted that output. And then from there, the biggest thing, because I know people are really looking at how do they deploy in production, is how we use our LMS judges. So we kind of have LMS judges kind of on the back end, but also guardrails. And essentially, the LMS judges is how we align with our clinicians that what we're saying and with our features is what we mean to say, right? So it's aligned with Omada's perspective. It's not drifting from what we want. And we make sure that we have really good alignment with them prior to launch. There's actually a feature inside of LangChain that allows you to align with your SMEs before launching, and then you can kind of look at those judges as you're in production. And then we also basically with those guardrails, try to mention that like we want to make sure the output doesn't generate anything that is of concern before it even goes to the member. So we're thinking about like guardrails is like before generation, and LMS judges is more kind of like passive monitoring in the back end. So those are kind of two ways that we really look at kind of building that clinical safety in our product, as well as making sure our clinicians are like, yes, we align with this before we launch and then during launch. So happy to chat more, but that's kind of our stance on clinicians and building and safety and trust.
And just to set the baseline for our users, we have a question about what is LMS? I believe the question is what is LLMs, Sunaina, that you were talking about?
Oh, like LLM as judges, perhaps?
Yes.
I can maybe, yeah, I can maybe dive into that a little bit more. So the idea is that you use another LLM to then judge your existing LLM. So you probably have a foundational model being used in your feature, and that has some sort of system prompt, say it's generating different insights. And you now have another LLM saying, like, hey, you are a monitor of this LLM. Is it safe? Is it trustworthy? Is it credible? And then it's sort of saying, you know, how often is your feature in alignment with your LLM as judge? Oh yeah, LLMs. So I may have just eaten my words, but that's kind of how we use LLM as judges.
Hillary, I think something that we think about a lot in terms of building trust with our clinicians, we haven't built any patient-facing technology, but a lot of our clinicians came in kind of skeptical of AI, will be totally honest. They like tried using an AI scribe 8, 12 months ago, and they were like, this wasn't very good. And they kind of like threw it to the curb. But we use a lot of AI to make it faster for them to start their own practices. And something that we have found that builds trust is that we'll often do something manually a few times with them. And then we will automate the process and show them how much faster it is for them and for us. And all of a sudden, you see like the light bulb switch on over people's heads, and they're like, oh, wait, this technology is actually really cool. And then once that moment happens, we have seen them start to use like Claude or ChatGPT on their own to do things like generate outbound emails or website copy or things like that. And so I think a lot of it is just showing people the value that AI can have to them because it feels really obvious to us in this room. But I think so many people who aren't like living and breathing AI every day, it it either feels like a really scary technology or it feels like, oh, this is a kind of silly like party trick.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing both Taylor and Sunaina say is trust is really about a curve, a continuum, right? So you start with your baseline, you end up at trust if you're lucky, right? If things go well. And in between, the value comes from making sure that your audience is curious and invested. And so one of the things that I find we do really well at FastX Partners, where I do a lot of the work with the Community Health Center and FQHC space, it was we start by really recognizing where folks are because we understand we've been in those roles, we know those challenges, and it helps them feel validated. They know that we know what they're talking about. Then, when you have that common baseline established, you can ask questions. So, helping people figure out what the right questions are is really important, but asking them those right questions can really advance the conversation because then they'll become a little curious. And if you have an innovator, especially a clinician who's an innovator, who's curious, they're going to take it and run. And then they want the data. So then you want to be validated, right? And some of my fellow panelists are nodding. And that's really how you get to trust. So it's iterative. It's about being transparent around both communication and information, and then working toward that goal.
And also,
Tanya. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry. Oh, I want to ask. I mean, I agree with all of you, but I think that always is pretty important to set expectation from the beginning, and sometimes link it with the whole development process. For example, in the MVP one, we will reach this 60% of accuracy in our initial golden data set, and that include to have the enough time of a co-design with the expert. I mean, with the person who are subject matter expert in the domain. And sometimes some companies has that approach that thinks that in MVP one everything will be work fine and it's not real. And sometimes the MVP they say, okay, no, my definition is that could be done. And to build that trust, I think, as Tanya mentioned, is a step by step, as is an iterative process. But it's critical for me to set up the expectation and during the whole process, doing that increase of in the metrics, in the accuracy, and so on. I mean, the different metrics that you could use. So that
Yeah, you brought up a really good point, right? Which is that there's a lot of conversations about accuracy and different thresholds that we oftentimes see. It's like 60%, 80%. And with clinicians, I've often found they're like, what does that mean, right? If we're at 90% accuracy, is that good? Is it 95%? Oftentimes they want 100%. And so what we've started to do is really, and kind of Tanya mentioned this too, right? As kind of the people in this room, is translating what clinicians want, right? So if they're really worried about something, what does that sound like from a user's perspective, right? What is that kind of coming in as? And where are they like, oh, I really want to be concerned with this person or this kind of statement or this part of the statement? And so from there, we're able to say, with all of these questions, maybe it's 100 questions, maybe it's 1,000 questions, but these are the high risk ones. Like I'm really worried about them, and this is why I'm worried about them. These ones I'm less worried about because maybe they're more general or we already have really good guidelines around that. And so now when you get to that 80% or 90% accuracy across these 100 questions, they're like, oh, it actually caught all of the high risk questions. I feel really good about this versus like, oh, maybe it messed up the low risk ones, but I'm less worried about that because it caught the ones I was really concerned about. And so because they're now kind of seeing that number and they know what it means, they're like, okay, I have a lot more trust in the system than before, where it's like, this could generate anything. I'm really worried about it. And so that's a really big piece I kind of mentioned to like the product managers as I mentor them, is like really making sure your 90%, your 80% really means something to your clinicians. And then you can kind of build from there.
Anyone else want to jump on that? Or shall I move to the next question? All right. So I think Sunaina, you mentioned so much of this depends on engaging users and engaging the people who are going to be impacted by the software. So the question I want to ask for you all is as you're making strategic AI decisions, as you're thinking about who those users are, the other thing that's really important to factor in is the context of your company. So this depends a lot on, I want to focus especially on size, customers, and data that you have. And how does that determine what kind of strategic questions you ask about AI implementation and what you ultimately build?
I can
I'll
start.
jump in there with a quick response. So I think those different factors, Hillary, really help you narrow down what type of problem you can solve with AI. Because all of our clients, all of our customers want to use AI in ways larger or smaller. They often don't know where to start, how they're currently, in fact, using it. They kind of need to have a level set. And then they need to understand that it's not just an implementation. So in your initial poll, I think it was 60% of folks were really at the like deploying component. And I think a significant proportion of our attendees, at least at that point, were founders. People want to move, they want to move quickly, and they want to be efficient, and they want to realize those returns on investment or those values on investment, depending on what concept you're using. I think you really have to take a step back and remember, to Marcos's point, it's really about a life cycle. It's not just choose your vendor, implement your tool, and then you're going to see those returns and move on. You're talking about data that is going to impact people's lives, whether it's directly on patients or members or not. It is going to impact a provider. It's going to impact some other stakeholder in the ecosystem. And the more data you have, the more quickly you can move because the better you can train your models or work with someone who can train your models, but the risk also goes up, which brings us back to trust. So I think that the size of the client, the size of the data, those types of issues can move you more quickly, but also, and Taylor, I'd love for you to jump in because I see you nodding. I think when you work with a larger entity, you have more to work with, but you have more at stake. So.
Yeah, so Kinstead is a very new company. We signed our first customer right before Halloween of 2025. So kind of the opposite, I think, of who your clients probably are, Tanya. And when we have very little data as a result of that, but we're able to use AI really quickly because we'll have one meeting with a client or a customer. They'll say, my pain point is I can't see where all of my insurance applications are. Like, I have no idea how many insurers you've actually submitted my credentialing to, or if any of them have been rejected, or what's happening there. And we can take that information and within, 24, 48 hours with either a Lovable or a Claude code, we're able to develop an MVP that shows them exactly the answer to their question. So I think there's something nice about being this early and this new in a company during this kind of like age of exploration for AI, if you will, because we have the opportunity to just go out and test different things and see if it works, and then get to test it really quickly off of our customers and iterate as quickly as possible.
I can come in more as a Omada's been around for a while. It's been around for 15 years. And so for us, the biggest thing is thinking about what data we're allowed to use and where. And so essentially, before we become a provider for the member, the data is actually part of the company. And so we can only use it in certain ways based on their contract versus once they are kind of a member and they are working with us directly, we have a lot more access to the data and we're able to kind of make better decisions based on that. But at the same time, I think sometimes we have, especially with AI, a mixture of like machine learning models and generative AI models. And so it's like, what can we do with the machine learning models that then we have enough data, right? So there's enough, what is it? Like, I guess, information coming from that around like the features that we can then use that within our generative AI models and also making sure that we don't get too distilled down to a specific profile. So a big thing we think about, especially as we are member facing, is like, how can we still personalize information without it being about one person specifically? So kind of creating like different types of segments as we're building out the generative side. So that's definitely one thing we have to keep in mind since I know there's some regulations going around how we use AI for clinical decision making. But as of right now, I think the law basically says like you can't have AI doing personalized insights or becoming at like a device. And so that's definitely a line we try to make sure we follow very carefully.
I think, Sunaina, it's really good to point that out, that the law offers certain regulatory guidelines, guardrails, restrictions. I think there are also any number of organizations, whether they be regional or whether they be national, at least here in the US, and certainly they exist in the UK as well, that are looking at some best practices. So one of those groups that I happen to be a member of is CHAI, which is the Coalition for Healthcare AI. And there are any number of different work groups that meet and discuss best practice guidelines, and they put out testing and evaluation considerations because no organization has the time to go and recreate all of the wheels. And if you can at least get a head start by seeing what some other organizations have done and asking these questions, and they also have a diversity of stakeholder input, so it's not coming from any one particular perspective. Um, but I'd love to hear, Marcos, what you think about this because you're working with the data, right? You're in there doing the development. The rest of us are on the implementer, operator, strategy, decision-making side. You are working with that data and you've worked with it across other industries. How does that hit for
Yeah,
you?
well, sometimes it's a headache. But yes, there are a lot of conversation with data governance departments, where you need to iterate over, the regulation. For example, the HIPAA regulation every year has new regulations, and sometimes you need to change your way to use the data, not only the data, the workflows with your data. Because, for example, if you are doing AI for medical patient intake, at the beginning of 2004, you could use a lot of information that right now is not able to use. So you need to always think in the workflow with your data that you could evolve at the same time that the regulation are evolving. For that, I always talk about the open the black box, because if your workflow has very good traceability and has the whole piece of information, easy to, okay, this data we need to obfuscate, or we open the message that we are using in a wrapper to call an external LPI. And if you are using external language model, you need to figure out a lot of pre-processing, perhaps using a small language model or machine learning model, traditional, as Nina mentioned, to hide the specificity of your patient data before to call a generative AI model. So there are a lot of things to take in count before to jump in a production. But once you are ready and do it in different client and different customer, you have like a template ready to start to work. And regarding the question, I want to add something about small companies, because we are talking about the big ones. And sometimes the small company doesn't have big budgets or big amount of information, but they indeed could be create AI application and use, for example, a small model with some tool that facilitate, for example, a patient intake solution that could reduce your waiting time and as a patient and clinician, and that optimize the employee times and the patient time, and that could be able to create without be outside the regulation, because there are a small application you could run in self-hosted servers in his own clinicians. So there are not always AI application for big companies. There are all solutions for a small company too.
Yeah, thanks for that perspective. Coming into a related question, we've got a couple of questions coming in from our audience. Jordan is asking, how do you validate if the AI tools you use for clients are secure, and how do you handle questions about security from clients? Sunaina, you gave kind of a very brief answer in the chat, but you want to say another word, and then Marcos, we want to get your perspective on this as well.
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest takeaway from what I said is, where is your data going, right? Because oftentimes that's the biggest piece in healthcare is you have very specific information that you don't want leaving your hands, or if it is leaving your hands, where is it going? How is it being retained? So the biggest thing we look for is like a zero data retention policy. So even if it is going somewhere, it's not being looked at, it's not being used for any kind of training, it's not, going to show up somewhere it's not supposed to. The biggest thing we also try to aim for is hosting it in our own cloud. So we're an Amazon workshop. And so we try to bring it into our virtual cloud such that we're hosting it. We control everything about it. We know that we know exactly where the data is going. And so the biggest thing for us is that we can look, any one of our clients in the eye and say, we've used the data, it stayed with us. If it has left, this is where it's leaving to, but they're not using it. Because I think as clients who work in healthcare, the biggest thing we keep coming back to is trust, is that they will trust you with their, members' information, and that you are using it in the right way, and that you're not using it in a malicious perspective. So the biggest thing we also look for is like BAAs that are able to be signed, and also look for previous instances that they've worked with a healthcare company. So as we all know, the AI infrastructure ecosystem is vast, right? There's voice ones, there's different model providers. And so being able to say, hey, have you worked with a healthcare company before? What's the size of that company, right? Speaking of small, medium, large, how have you kind of used their data? What is the practices? Some companies will say, oh, we have a de-identification step prior to it coming to us. And that all has to be reviewed by our lawyers. I would definitely say this is one to definitely get your lawyers involved, because as soon as you go through the process and bring that vendor in-house, you want to make sure that it end-to-end is safe and ethical. So a BAA, I believe, is actually, it's a fun acronym I think our lawyers use.
Business Assistance Agreement.
Thank you. You were nodding along, so you were like, I know.
For the builders in the room, actually, it's surprisingly easy to get a BAA with many of the larger foundational models like ChatGPT, OpenAI, Claude, Anthropic, they seem like they're pretty hungry for healthcare business. So we have had a harder time getting a BAA with legacy systems than we have with getting a BAA with any of the LLMs or AI companies, interestingly enough.
Marcos, anything else you want to
Yeah.
highlight on this security question?
Well, I think as Nina said, there are a lot of problem solved if you are using same provider and you have the whole infrastructure. For example, we are often trying to use the same provider to self-hosted the LLM or the generative AI solution, plus the other part of the logic of the business and the software, and that using VPC and the whole security framework that to use to typical applications. And also we often use external framework, for example, Panta and Security Frame, which are a framework that you could use to validate things like SOC 2 compliance, and there are another external things like kind of HIPAA, but you will have a panel where you check your own solution and see what are good, what are in warning or something like that, and you made the fix with with your developing team.
All right, I'm going to bring in another audience question here. Going back to this question of how we build for the end users. One of the things that we know in health tech is that end user is not the same as the payer always. And so one of our anonymous attendees wants to know, in the landscape of healthcare SaaS, is it more crucial to consider the feedback of end users, such as clinicians, or more so the decision makers, such as payers, medical admin, ACOs, and how do you balance those two interests? Taylor, do you want to take a stab at this one? Can I put you on the spot?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. You well, Kinstead is different from a lot of other options for nurse practitioners out there because we work with insurance companies, and because we allow them to accept insurance in an easier way than what they could do in like a DIY way. And so for us, it's always very important to be thinking about what our partners, not just clinicians, but also payers would want from us. For the most part, right now, I actually think many people are still figuring out what the paradigms are around AI and what they want and what they don't want from it. So we're in a nice sandbox environment, if you will, where we can build things for providers, tell some of our payer partners about them, or tell some of our patients about different AI tools that we're using, and people are like, "Oh, this is interesting. Let's see where this goes." So check back with me in like 12 to 18 months on this question. I might have a different perspective, but for right now, I think you still can build with everybody in mind in like a fairly acceptable way.
I can jump in here as well. So what I would say on the payer's perspective is they care about two things right now is trust. I think it's going to keep being the anthem of everything we talk about, which is they can trust you. They're an existing client. They know how you're using their member data. The second is they're focused on generally outcomes. And so AI is a means to an end. Are you still getting outcomes at scale? Is AI kind of helping that? And so if you can tell the story around how AI is helping improve their outcomes in a better way, in a more scalable way, I think they're definitely open to that conversation. And then internally, the way we kind of operate is we look at our clinicians as our source of truth, right? They're subject matter experts on how we provide care, how we make sure that what we do is safe and clinical. And then we kind of boil all that down into making sure that the member experience kind of encapsulates that, right? So how can members be healthier, better equipped for us? Omada really focuses in the diabetes, cardiometabolic space. And so how can they live better, longer lives, kind of reduce that cognitive load using AI while getting the outcomes that our payers so desperately want and kind of pay us for. So that's kind of how we kind of look at that trifecta.
I'll just say, and I agree absolutely with what Sunaina and Taylor just said. It's really an extension of the product market fit concept, just expanding the number of stakeholders beyond kind of the product and the market. You can't have people building because they think it's the right thing to build unless you know that it is going to have the desired impact on the end users. And when you're in healthcare, you're talking about clinicians and their teams. So, I mean, that's the short and of the long of it. I will say just one more comment on the security issue. One thing we haven't talked about that I know this is not the focus for today. We're really here to talk about AI and chatbots as one example of AI. But when you're talking about security and when you're talking about people trying to move quickly, we know that shadow IT happens all the time. And even if you don't have a robust governance policy, especially for founders who are just starting, and this isn't on your top 200 items to do this week, you need to have a policy about using AI on personal devices, at the very least, if that's the first thing you do, much less thinking about having your own policies for how you're going to use tools internally as an organization. These folks are going to whip out their phone and they're going to import information, and they may have just shared mission critical information that you really would rather not share with whatever particular tool that they have deployed, because if it's not actually one of the professional levels and it's not secured, talking about the data. So just throw that out there, reminding people we're all used to quick access to information, but you make one small mistake, you have one big lawsuit, and that trust is absolutely gone. So.
And I want to bring it back around to that title that Tanya just mentioned of this webinar, Beyond the Chatbot, and ask the question, when is a chatbot the right interface in health tech and when is it not? And I'm going to put a little spin on this and add in the question that Nathan put in the chat. Thinking especially about how do you make that decision when the AI space is moving so rapidly and you're thinking about the evolution of the technology. What are the things you weigh when figuring out what the right AI solution is?
I have a really strong perspective on this chatbot question. So I originally started to build a different company now almost a year ago, and we were going to be building a very early version of a chatbot for healthcare, where you're going to be able to ask questions about basic healthcare questions that people frequently ask. Things like, is this a UTI or a yeast infection, right? Um, and what we found was that once somebody figures out how to use one of the big chatbots, Claude, OpenAI, Gemini, it is very, very hard to move that behavior off of that and onto a specialized chatbot. So I think if you are trying to build a general knowledge-based chatbot, you either have to have a significant wealth of data so that you can personalize those insights. I feel like Aura did a pretty good job with this with their advisor tool inside of the app. Like it knows how much I sleep. ChatGPT doesn't, so I'm more likely to ask Aura a sleep question than ChatGPT. But if you don't have that kind of data, I think it's a really hard consumer behavior to change to move somebody off of a platform that's already really sticky and that they feel like knows them really, really well. Um, to answer the question about infrastructure, because we also have a strong perspective on this, we may be overbuilt, but I would like to think that this is the smarter option for the long term. We have made it so that all of our systems can use any of the major LLMs as our foundational model. They are moving so quickly and getting good at different things at such different speeds that because it's easier to set up that piping early rather than trying to build it in like a year or two, we just felt like it was worth the engineering effort now to make it so that we can be really flexible. And if you have an engineering team that can do something like that, I do recommend it because we have found that different LLMs are very good at very different tasks, and being able to just toggle across them has been super useful for us.
Taylor, I'll follow you, which is a hard act, I'll say. But I think one distinction, and I think many people in the audience already are aware of this, but for those who might not be, there's a distinction in chatbots and in all AI between deterministic and probabilistic. And deterministic is when you ask AI a question and you're always going to get the same answer, right? It's not going to vary because there's not a model. It's yes or no. How old will I be tomorrow, right? I was born on this date and time in this year. How old will I be tomorrow? What are the office hours for the clinic? Understanding some things can change, but if the answers are not expected to change, that's deterministic. Probabilistic is really what we're all mostly thinking about. But for those who are trying to figure out, should I use a chatbot in my clinic or with my startup, if it's something static, if the answers are primarily static, and if you have the budget, I think we heard Marco say that there are budgets that are right sized for smaller organizations. That would be a great way to save the humans energy and time and resources and focus on something else. If you could have a chatbot that can answer questions that are never going to answer, never going to change, or rarely going to change, right? Now, I will tell you, I have a very strong bias. I have rarely engaged with a chatbot for a specific company that gave me the answer that I wanted because my questions are usually too specific and require more detail. It's not the fault of the chatbot, it's because I'm expecting the wrong thing. But I think if you could take a look at the problem, figure out what you're currently doing now to address that problem, look at what it would cost you to implement and maintain, because you have to maintain these chatbots, that's a really easy one. And I think that a lot of people have already addressed this on the panel. If you've got information that isn't going to change very often, that isn't patient facing, that is going to be about facts or about operational statistics, sure, automate that. Use a chatbot for that because you can always include an elevate, an escalate, a bump to, a connect with, and then get your human in the loop. So.
The other piece I would say is because most people do start with a chatbot because it is easier to stand up, is it's a great wealth of user research. People love to ask chatbots all sorts of things you didn't know it would ask, which is definitely a heartache on the regulatory side, but is a really good thing on the product side. So what I would say is start with a chatbot, right? Sometimes it's a good thing to just create a surface where people can ask different things and you can sort of see what are people thinking as long as you maybe tee it up correctly. But from there, how can you kind of move it into more of an agentic application? So Taylor mentioned Aura. The thing I think about with a lot of these, especially in the behavior change world, is if we're still just giving you an answer, are we really helping you get to where you need to be, right? So if you're constantly asking about like, how do I make this recipe? Or like, I don't have the ingredients for my recipe. It's like, okay, maybe asking a chatbot isn't going to get you to make that recipe. But if instead there's now like a calendar hold that's like, hey, you're cooking at this time, or like, hey, now is the time to like go to the grocery store. Or, you know what? The grocery order's already ready. Like, go pick it up. So, like, how can we sort of move from the chatbot to AI actually helping a user take actions that then get them to their end goal, either a user or a clinician, such that we're kind of moving people closer to the end game versus like maybe continuing to give them either knowledge or answers. And so that's kind of how I think about moving from maybe chatbot to more an agentic one. And then the biggest thing I think about, even in the realm of support and like if you have existing documentation, is this is probably a move for your company, right? Like you were static, you were kind of answering things that were coming in via telephone or email. Can you start to improve your process via like AI, right? So people talk about RAG, they talk about memory. Can we start to incorporate like saving really good answers, right? People love this answer. Great, let's save it so that it's efficient the next time. AI is really good at kind of that self-healing process. And so are there areas where you have existing documentation, but maybe it's really inefficient? Can you now start to like build up this repository over time? And then it's sort of taking care of that admin away from you, and you're really be able to focus on like your core operations, which are getting people healthier.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think I want to add something. When I thinking about uh, chatbots, I always try to make a distinction because typical there are a lot of problems that we can solve with AI automations instead to chatbot. And I like to think the chatbot shows us an interface where we can set boundaries. And as you mentioned, it's very easy to set up and create a new chatbot with the problem that Tanya mentioned, the deterministic problem. But when the problem that you want to solve is to automate to every Sunday do something, or use the interface to chatbot to program things like the calendar. I want to combine this document with another document. There are not chatbot use case, are more like AI automations that save time and administrative tasks saving. But the chatbot itself, for me, is just the interface. And when you try to solve something that you need in the front line, like a human, our chatbot every time are growing in a way that right now we could use model audio to audio, so you could simulate like a person, but at the same time you need to take in count that that interface will be now able to do a lot of deterministic tasks. So perhaps you need to create a very AI workflow on the back end of that application, and the chatbot could be an option of interface, but at the end of the day, the problem that you want to solve is a different one. It's not only for a chatbot. So I think that there is a lot of problem that today the people are trying to solve with a chatbot that are just AI automations. So I want to make that division there.
Thank you. That's a good distinction. We're going to try to make space for one more question. In the chat, Oren was asking the panel's thoughts on openness to AI between various types of buyers. Do you see either hospitals, health systems, consumers being more open to this technology, and or sectors within health tech? Are certain sectors more interested in adopting or adopting faster?
I'll give a quick answer, which is that it's a balance of risk and resources. So larger entities often have more resources and are more willing to take on more risk. Smaller entities have less of both, but they're still absolutely curious and moving forward.
Right, and we are coming up on the end of our hour. I know there's a couple of questions we didn't get to, so feel free to find our panelists on LinkedIn. We'll send out their contact information as well in the follow-up email. And if you have a burning question, feel free to reach out to them directly. I want to close with the question, what advice would each of you give to a founder who's feeling the pressure to add more AI right now?
I feel like every time you meet anybody who is involved in startups, they're like, so what AI are you using today? So I very much feel this pressure question. Um, I think AI is great. And I mean, I use AI so much that it often does feel like a third co-founder, not facetiously. Um, but I also think there are moments where we have been guided to go insert AI in places where it's not necessarily effective. So I think the more you can keep your eyes on the road in front of you and realize AI is going to be helpful in doing X. For us, it's very helpful in everything regarding credentialing and tracking. But it might not be as effective in other things. Like we just haven't found it to be as effective in automating certain communications, for example. It's faster for us to just type it in ourselves than to get the AI to write something and then us to fix it. The more you are able to keep your eye on that ROI and stop listening to what everybody is going to tell you. And because the number one thing I learned becoming a founder is that suddenly everybody wants to give you advice, I think the better off on your road you will be.
I completely agree with that, Taylor. I think you're so right. And the way I would summarize it is to say, consider the null hypothesis. What if we didn't do that, right? And so here's a non-clinical, non-healthcare example. There are many different scheduling tools like Calendly. If I weren't using Calendly, I would spend probably 2 hours a week trying to schedule meetings, and I would have fewer meetings with people, and that would be not great for everybody. That's a simple no-brainer. Do it. Yes, right? You need to be able to apply obviously more rigor when you're talking about healthcare decisions and when you're talking about bigger implementations and they have a deeper touch. but I think you're absolutely right. Consider not doing it and consider what you're really going to get out of it.
I think we've lightly touched on cost and the concept of ROI, but at the end of the day, right, it's like what chunk of the work are you taking on? When I'm talking to people, sometimes they're like, oh, there's like this one workflow or this one little thing. If you're replacing that with AI, chances are it's going to cost you more because every inference cost is you're paying someone, unless you're self-hosting it, in which case you're still paying someone. But then at the same time, if you're not taking on a big enough chunk, the ROI is just not there, right? You're going to be paying out more, you're maybe getting back less, and then it's just people are going to be looking at it and you're like, wait, we spent all this money, but we're not really changing anything. And so the biggest thing I always say is, first off, don't go with AI first, like everyone said. I mean, really focus on like what problem you have, and then don't just try to go from point A to point B, right? Don't fix that. With AI, really think about like what is the larger problem you're trying to address? Can AI help you, right? Can it automate it? Can you put an agent there such that it's like taking over an entire process versus like maybe just, automating A to B? And then also be mindful of your cost. Really spec out your cost. You may want to do like a little pilot to understand that, but that starts to help you understand how much your system end to end is going to be. It is different than traditional software, in that you will have ongoing cost. And so that's the biggest thing I think kind of worries people, right? And so I think getting ahead of that is very helpful. And also think big. I say with AI, like the bigger you are, the better that cost is going to be for you. So that would be my takeaway.
Yeah, totally agree. I wanna add that same. When we think about in an internal initiative or something like that, we make this like a pre-sale process where put the whole in the table and make the decision, because sometimes there is no make the effort that we need to put in that. And other times, yes, as you mentioned, perhaps you are trying to go for point A to B, and there is another place that increase our time or capabilities. So the AI is not for all problems, but there are a lot of things that we can do with AI.
Thank you all. Thanks for an incredible conversation. Before we log off here, just want to get a quick feedback from you all. I've got to pull up now how you would rate this webinar. This is going to help us continue to design programming that serves your all needs, and that is aligned. So if you have a moment, please respond to that before you log off. As I mentioned, we'll be sending up more info in the follow-up, including opportunities for you to connect with each of our panelists and continue the conversation with them. Thank you all so much for being here. We'll see you next time.